I never imagined walking into a stranger's room could change my life forever. There he was, tall, impossibly charming, and everything I never knew I needed. At 27, I found myself standing in front of a 39-year-old billionaire who, with just one look, promised me a love I'd never forget. Before I tell you my story, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. You don't want to miss this roller coaster of love, betrayal, and unexpected twists. I never thought my life would feel so ordinary until that day. At 27, I was just another black woman with big dreams tucked behind a routine I couldn't quite escape. I had my little apartment, my steady job, and a calendar full of ambitions I was determined to chase. Most mornings felt the same: coffee, traffic, work, the quiet nights when I imagined a life more extraordinary than my own. I had friends, a few close enough to share secrets with, and yet there was this constant pull inside me, a yearning for something that felt bigger, more vivid, more alive. I didn't know then that life had a way of shoving you into the moments you weren't ready for, moments that leave you breathless and questioning everything you thought you knew about yourself. That afternoon, I had no plan to enter his world, no invitation, and yet, somehow, my feet carried me to a door that would change everything. I remember pausing outside it, my hand hovering over the handle, a strange mix of nerves and curiosity twisting in my stomach. Why am I even here? I thought. Maybe it was impulsive. Maybe it was fate. Maybe it was just a reckless curiosity that refused to be silenced. I opened the door, expecting nothing more than a glimpse into someone else's life, a momentary distraction from my own, and yet the air shifted the instant I stepped in. He was there, not just standing, but existing in a way that seemed to command the space around him. At 39, he was older than me by over a decade, but his presence didn't feel intimidating. It felt magnetic. His hair, perfectly styled, caught the sunlight in a way that made it almost seem alive, and his eyes. His eyes had this depth, this quiet intelligence, the kind that made you feel like he could see straight through the layers you spent years building around yourself. There was a calm power about him, the kind that doesn't scream for attention but pulls it effortlessly. Even in a casual shirt and slacks, he looked like he owned the world without trying. I felt my heartbeat skip, caught between awe and a flicker of fear, wondering what someone like him could possibly want with someone like me. I froze for a moment, caught between curiosity and caution, my mind racing while my body betrayed me with a faint tremble. My curiosity urged me forward. I wanted to know more, to see if the man before me was as intriguing as he seemed. Yet caution whispered in the back of my mind, reminding me of the disparity, the risks, the invisible lines I wasn't sure I wanted to cross. And in that tension, standing in the quiet of his room, I felt something stir inside me, a mixture of thrill, uncertainty, and the unshakable sensation that this encounter was no ordinary moment. Something about him made me want to lean in, to risk the fall, even as a small, rational voice warned me to step back. That was the moment it all began. The instant I realized I was no longer just a girl in her ordinary life. I was a girl standing in the presence of a man who seemed impossible, a man who promised something unspoken, something dangerous, something that could turn my world upside down. I had no idea then how right and wrong would start to blur, or how that simple step into his room would be the first page of a story I couldn't stop reading. I didn't know what I expected when I stayed there, lingering awkwardly in his room, but it certainly wasn't the way our conversation would unfold. At first, it was just small talk, careful words, measured questions, polite smiles. I told myself to keep it light, to stay distant, but there was something in the way he listened. in the way his gaze never wavered that made it impossible to retreat. Each word felt deliberate yet effortless, like he was reading between the lines of my thoughts, drawing me in without even trying. I caught myself laughing more than I had in months, surprised by how natural it felt, surprised by how safe it felt to just be. There was a rhythm to the way he spoke, a cadence that pulled me forward, breaking down the walls I had spent years building. I noticed little things, how he leaned slightly forward when he wanted to emphasize a point, the gentle arch of his brow when he was amused, the soft tension in his hands when he was thoughtful. I couldn't explain it, but every detail seemed designed to hold me in that moment, to make the world outside disappear. And somehow, I didn't mind. I wanted the world to disappear. I found myself revealing parts of me I rarely shared, dreams I had tucked away, fears I whispered to no one, moments that had shaped me into who I was. And he didn't judge, not once. Instead, he seemed genuinely interested, curious in a way that felt rare, almost dangerous in its intensity. It was intoxicating. With every answer, every shared memory, every laugh that slipped between us, I felt the invisible line between strangers and something more start to blur. And yet, even as my heart leaned in, my mind pulled back. This was a billionaire I had stumbled upon, a man whose life was galaxies away from mine. Why would someone like him care about someone like me? My caution whispered warnings, the kind that make you step lightly, the kind that remind you that the world has people who promise forever but rarely deliver. I wanted to resist, to remind myself of reality, but there was something magnetic in his presence, something that made me question whether rules and logic even applied here. There was a subtle tension building between us, an unspoken understanding that we were both aware of the pull, of the connection forming, fragile but undeniable. I wanted to explore it, to see where this curiosity might lead, even though every part of me knew the risks. There was a vulnerability in letting someone in this quickly, but there was also a thrill, a spark that told me, maybe this was exactly where I was meant to be. By the time I left that room, hours later, I was different. I wasn't just a girl from an ordinary life anymore. I was someone standing on the edge of a story I hadn't imagined for myself. Someone daring to wonder if this billionaire, this enigmatic man who had promised nothing yet made me feel everything, might just be the person who could change my life completely. And for the first time in a long time, I wanted to find out. It wasn't long before the conversation shifted, almost imperceptibly, from casual connection to something deeper. I could feel it in the way his voice softened when he spoke about his life, the weight behind his words that made me realize he wasn't just a charming stranger. There was a story behind those eyes, a history I couldn't fully grasp, but wanted desperately to understand. At 39, he carried himself with the calm confidence of someone who had seen the world and survived it, someone who had everything yet still seemed to crave something real, something human. And that craving, I realized, might just be for me. He shared glimpses of his past, carefully choosing what to reveal, yet never hiding the emotions underneath. He spoke of heartbreaks that had taught him patience, of choices that had shaped him into the man he was today. It was raw, and for a moment, I felt like I was being trusted with something sacred. I listened, captivated not just by his words, but by the honesty in them, the vulnerability that he didn't usually show the world. And then, almost casually, he said the words that made my chest tighten. I want you in my life. I want this, us, to be forever. Hearing that, my mind raced, flipping between disbelief and hope. Forever was a word I had almost stopped believing in. A promise I had heard too often, only to watch it crumble. And yet, there it was, spoken directly to me by a man who seemed impossible in every way, yet undeniably real. I wanted to laugh out of relief, cry out of fear, and run out of instinct all at the same time. I didn't know how to respond because no one had ever spoken to me like that before. Not with such certainty, not with such depth. I felt a strange mixture of vulnerability and excitement. My heart whispered, maybe this is real. Maybe he truly means it. But my mind, trained by years of caution and past disappointments, reminded me that promises are fragile, especially when made by someone whose life exists on a plane far beyond mine. Could a billionaire, with all his wealth and influence, really want someone like me? Could forever even exist in a world where everything else is bought and sold? And yet, the sincerity in his eyes silenced my doubts. There was no arrogance, no manipulation, just a steady assurance that this wasn't a fleeting whim. In that moment, I realized that trust wasn't something I could force. It had to grow quietly, moment by moment. But something in his words, in his presence, made me willing to take the risk, willing to hope. I could feel the weight of possibility pressing against my chest, the pull of something that might change everything. Leaving that day, I walked away with a promise lingering in my mind, a promise that felt as fragile as it was powerful. Forever wasn't just a word anymore. It was a challenge, a hope, a question that begged to be answered. And deep down, I knew that whether I wanted to admit it or not, my life had just shifted irreversibly. I was no longer merely existing. I was on the brink of a love that dared me to believe in it, even when logic told me to be afraid. Just when I thought I could let myself breathe, reality crept in like a shadow I hadn't noticed before. Being drawn to him was effortless, intoxicating even. But love, I was quickly reminded, isn't just about butterflies and stolen glances. It's about vulnerability, risk, and sometimes heartbreak. I wanted to trust him completely, to give in to the pull that made my heart race. But the world outside his room reminded me that nothing this perfect ever came without complications. And complications, in my experience, had a way of arriving when you least expected them. The first crack in my newfound bubble came subtly. A message I misread, a glance that seemed distant, a hesitation in his voice. I couldn't tell if it was me imagining things or if something had shifted. Suddenly, my mind spun with 1,000 what ifs, each more alarming than the last. What if he wasn't serious? What if the promise of forever was just another carefully crafted illusion? I wanted to confront him, to demand clarity, but a quiet part of me feared the answer might break the fragile connection I had just begun to cherish. We tried to carry on, laughing, talking, sharing moments that felt suspended in time. But the tension was there, subtle and persistent. I found myself overthinking every gesture, analyzing every word, searching for signs that I could trust him or that I should run. It was exhausting, exhilarating, and terrifying all at once. The emotional roller coaster of wanting him, needing him, yet fearing the consequences, consumed me in ways I hadn't anticipated. Every smile felt tentative. Every touch seemed loaded with unspoken questions, and every glance was a test I didn't know I could pass. And then he did something that both shocked and reassured me. A small gesture, almost insignificant to anyone else, a note left in my bag, a message checking if I had eaten, a quiet conversation in which he acknowledged my fears, reminded me that he wasn't just another man playing a game. He was aware of my doubts, of my insecurities, and he was willing to meet me there in the vulnerable space where trust begins. That simple acknowledgement, that willingness to bridge the gap between our worlds, began to melt some of the walls I had so carefully constructed. Still, the conflict lingered because love isn't a straight path. It twists and turns, tests patience, and forces reflection. I realized that giving my heart to someone so powerful, someone whose life was far removed from mine, required a courage I hadn't summoned in years. I was terrified of being hurt, of losing myself in the process, but simultaneously, I couldn't ignore the pull, the undeniable truth that he made me feel alive in ways I had forgotten were possible. And somewhere deep inside, I made a quiet decision. I would lean into the uncertainty, let the vulnerability exist, and see if his actions truly matched the words he had promised. By the end of that day, I was a whirlwind of emotions: hope, fear, excitement, doubt. But one thing was clear: this wasn't a fleeting encounter, and neither was he. The emotional roller coaster had begun, and I had no choice but to ride it, heart wide open, even if the fall scared me more than I was willing to admit. As the days passed, our connection began to evolve in ways I hadn't imagined. What started as curiosity slowly transformed into something tender, intimate, and incredibly compelling. I noticed it in the small details: how he remembered things I had casually mentioned, how he left little surprises for me that made me smile without knowing why, how even the simplest conversations could feel like an entire world unfolding just for us. It was as if he had a way of making the ordinary feel extraordinary, of turning moments that might have been forgotten into memories I would carry with me forever. There were moments that made my heart ache with both excitement and disbelief. One afternoon, we talked for hours, the conversation flowing effortlessly between laughter, shared fears, and dreams we hadn't dared voice to anyone else. I found myself letting go of the walls I had so carefully built around my heart, letting him see the real me, the hopes, the doubts, the messy, unpolished parts of who I was. And he didn't flinch, he didn't judge. Instead, he leaned in, his words soft, his eyes steady, giving me the kind of attention that made it impossible to think about anything else. Romance isn't always about grand gestures, though he had those too. It was in the quiet moments: the way he would text to make sure I'd eaten, the way he listened when I rambled about my day, the way he held my hand just a little longer than necessary. Those moments built a bridge between us, a delicate but unbreakable thread that made me trust him more with each passing day. I realized that he wasn't just a billionaire or a man of power. He was someone willing to invest himself in a way that mattered, someone who valued connection over appearance, substance over show. And yet, the romance wasn't without its intensity. Every touch, every lingering gaze carried weight. It was thrilling and terrifying in equal measure. I was learning that love, especially the kind that sweeps in unexpectedly, demands courage. I had to allow myself to feel fully, to be vulnerable without guarantees, to accept the uncertainty while still believing in the possibility of something beautiful. With him, each moment was a test of my own heart: how much I could trust, how much I could let go, and how much I could surrender to the pull I could no longer resist. By the end of those days, I realized I had changed. I was no longer just observing life from the sidelines. I was living it, intensely and openly, with a man who made me feel alive in ways I hadn't thought possible. The bond we shared was growing stronger, anchored not just in attraction, but in understanding, respect, and a quiet, unspoken promise that this connection was worth every risk. And somewhere deep inside, I knew that this was only the beginning. What we had was rare, intoxicating, and real, and I was ready to embrace every moment of it, even if it scared me more than I was willing to admit. It all came to a head one evening, the kind of night that seemed ordinary until it wasn't. I remember standing there, caught between fear and anticipation, feeling the tension in the air like static before a storm. We had shared so much by then: laughter, late night confessions, quiet touches that spoke louder than words. But there was always that lingering question: Would his promise of forever hold, or was it just another fleeting illusion? That night, I was about to find out. He turned to me with a seriousness I hadn't seen before, the playful glint in his eyes replaced by something raw, something real. The weight of the moment pressed on my chest, making it hard to breathe, and yet I couldn't look away. He spoke slowly, deliberately, as if choosing every word with care, telling me he didn't just want me in his life, he needed me there. The words were different this time, heavier, carrying a gravity that made my heart pound. He spoke of commitment, of choosing me even when the world offered endless distractions, of building something together that no one could take away. In that instant, I felt every fear, every doubt, every insecurity I had carried with me suddenly collide with a sense of hope I hadn't allowed myself to feel in years. Could someone like him, someone so impossibly powerful, truly be sincere? I wanted to question him, to test his words, but looking into his eyes, I realized the truth was undeniable. There was no pretense, no facade, just a man willing to open his heart entirely, a man willing to risk it all for me. My own heart wavered between disbelief and surrender. I wanted to reach out, to throw caution to the wind, but vulnerability has a way of making even the strongest person hesitate. What if I allowed myself to believe and the world pulled him away? What if I fell too hard, too fast? The doubt screamed inside me, but there was a quieter, stronger voice beneath them, urging me to trust, to leap, to let myself feel everything he was offering. And then he did something that broke through every lingering wall I had left. A gentle touch, a whisper of my name, a moment that felt suspended in time. He gave me a reason to believe that this wasn't just a fleeting passion, that this was a turning point, the start of something lasting. In that instant, I realized I had a choice to retreat into the safety of doubt or to step fully into the unknown, into a love that demanded everything and promised just as much. I chose to step forward. I chose to let go. And in that choice, I felt the weight of the world lift, replaced by a dizzying sense of freedom and possibility. It was terrifying, overwhelming, and utterly exhilarating all at once. For the first time in my life, I understood that love could be both a risk and a reward, a storm and a shelter, and that this man, this impossible, captivating man, was offering me both. That night, everything changed. In the days that followed, I couldn't stop replaying that night in my mind, the moment when everything shifted. Standing there, holding on to a love that felt both fragile and unshakable, I realized that my life had transformed in ways I hadn't imagined. I was no longer just a 27-year-old woman watching life pass me by. I was living it, fully, intensely, and openly, with someone who made every heartbeat count. Being with him wasn't always easy. There were doubts, insecurities, and moments when the weight of our differences felt almost too heavy to bear. But through it all, the connection we had, built on trust, attention, and undeniable attraction, reminded me why taking risks in love was worth every fear. He wasn't just a billionaire or a man with power. He was someone who chose me again and again in ways that words alone could never capture. Now, I look back and understand that life has a way of surprising you, of placing extraordinary moments in the midst of ordinary days. That room, that conversation, that promise, they weren't just fleeting experiences. They were the start of a story I'm still living, a story of love, trust, and the kind of forever I never dared to imagine. Until him. If you felt every heartbeat of my story, hit like, share it with someone who loves a good love story, and don't forget to subscribe for more unforgettable tales of love, heartbreak, and surprises.